Hello and welcome to this edition of Upfront. I'm your host, Nancy Wilmot. You know, I've lived in this community for about 25 years, and I'll wager that if I had done a survey for every one of those years asking residents what their greatest concerns were, that crime and policing would have been pretty close to the top of the list, if not at the top of the list, year after year. And they've become even greater concerns as the opioid crisis and homelessness has begun to affect small communities like Port Alberni as well as the big cities, bringing with them all of the problems surrounding that. So I'm delighted to introduce Inspector Eric Rochette, officer in charge of the Port Alberni RCMP detachment. Inspector Rochette, welcome to Upfront.
Oh, thank you very much.
Now, Eric, I know from chatting earlier that you've had a long career with the RCMP before Port Alberni, but let's start by finding out a little bit about you. Tell me a little bit about what fortuitous route brought you here.
Well, so I was obviously born and raised in Montreal. So first language is French. I learned English later on in life. I did all my schooling in Montreal, went to university in Montreal. I went to Concordia University. I was always interested in policing. I don't have any family members part of the policing world, but it's something I was always interested. I was always interested in traveling as well. I wanted to find a job or a role or career that would kind of take me across the country. And RCMP seemed to be a right fit. I applied, did get in, did my training in 96, 97, and started my career in Manitoba. Did a few years there, then transferred to BC where I worked in Lower Mainland, different detachments there. Then I finally was able to promote, took over a detachment in the Kootenays, where I was for a few years. I also I was looking for an adventure. I was lucky enough to get a transfer to North District, which is the northern part of BC, where I worked in Fort Nelson for a few years. At that point, I have 5 or 6 years in policing, and I was interested in going back to school. I knew that I needed a background a bit more towards business, leadership, management. So I decided to go back to school. So I took a leave without pay and moved myself back to Montreal. And I went to the University of Montreal there, the business school, and obtained my graduate diploma in management. And while I was in Montreal, I contacted the local RCMP detachment in Montreal, and I was able to work part-time to help to pay for my schooling. And I worked with the Proceeds of Crime in Montreal and did that for a full year, finished my schooling, and then transferred back to BC where I worked at different detachments, and ultimately led me to taking a position in Comox Valley Detachment, where I was a staff sergeant, and I passed all the process to become a commissioned officer of the RCMP, and then the position came open in Port Alberni detachment. Obviously, I was interested. I competed for it, so the process is a little bit different for a commissioned officer. I had to send a resume, which was supported, and then I was interviewed by community leaders and was selected. And fast track 24 years into my career. I'm now in Port Alberni, and I've been here for basically a year. It's going to be June 1st will be 1 year in my post here.
Wow, 24 years, that's quite a career. And during that time, you've been in a lot of different cities, as you've said, some of them quite large, Surrey, Montreal, and others quite small. What is the difference in policing? How do you approach different sized cities differently?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So I work from Surrey, which is the biggest detachment in Canada, RCMP detachment as well. And my first command was a 3-person detachment, so it was a really small community. The biggest difference is obviously in small communities is an aspect of you get way more engaged in the community. You're kind of everything as well as in the detachment within the community. Obviously, you're a police officer, but usually involved in all social aspect of the community. You're the hockey coach, you're the baseball coach. The other aspect is, and it's not always welcome by certain members, but it's a lack of privacy. Like you're obviously known by everybody. So you go to a grocery store, they know who you are. And so you really have to work on, make sure that people understand what your role is, but as well as still maintaining being approachable. And that was always been something that I was always able to match to do my role as a police officer, as well as keeping like a respectful relationship with the public. So when I go to the park with my kids, there's no issues. I go grocery shopping, it's not an issue. Obviously, if you look at the community of Port Alberni, it's a little bit bigger, so a little bit more anonymous. But still, I'm quite involved with my kids in different activities, and see a lot of people that obviously know what I do for a living, and it's been really welcoming. The area where we live, they all obviously know what I do for a living, and people are really willing to help. And they ask questions and they have comments, and it's always welcome. They give me a different aspect to as what I see as maybe issues that for them they're maybe not as important, but have other concerns, and they're more than willing to talk to me about that. And it's always been great. And I'm looking forward to stay here for a few years, that's for sure.
I think it must be easier to get to know a new community when you have small children, because your children are involved in so many different things and therefore you become involved in so many things.
No, absolutely. Obviously, it's been challenging for us because of last year and this year. We moved it in June, so right in the middle of the COVID. But yes, you're absolutely right. So I have four young kids, and between the age of 4 and 10, so they're involved in dance, soccer, sporting activities, and as well, obviously, the schooling. And so it's been great for them to be able to connect with, make new friends. And but as far as like for us, for myself and for my wife, it's been a bit different as far as trying to meet people outside my role as the person in charge of the RCMP detachment. Is the fact that obviously all the social aspect hasn't been present the last year. Hopefully in the near future, things may change and may get better. But yeah, it's been challenging.
Hmm. And before we started taping today, you and I were talking a little bit about you appearing before City Council. And I have to say, one of the last times I saw you in front of City Council, you were delivering some very, very good news. And I wonder if you could share that with our viewers.
No, absolutely. Like, because obviously when I do City Council meeting, the big portion of the meeting is related to crime statistics. And in the last few years, I've seen a trend that the crime stats are going slightly downwards. But in the last year, we've seen a great reductions. And when we look at property crimes, even violent crime, they were kind of status quo in 2020. But the first quarter of 2021, we've seen a reduction of approximately 17% in violent crime as well. So when we talk about violent crime, that includes assault, domestic assault, as well as sexual assault. And property crimes used to be a really big issue in Port Alberni, and it is still an issue, don't get me wrong, but we've seen a really positive trend in the last year or so. Obviously, I'm always cautious because of the impact of COVID. People were restrained, stay home, maybe you could say an impact on property crimes. When we look at property crime, we look at break and enters and theft from vehicles or theft of vehicles. Those are some of the major issues we've seen in the past years. So it's been quite positive the last year, and I was really excited when I saw the statistics for the first quarter of 2021, because now we're overlapping a year within the COVID impact, and I've seen that the trends is still going downwards. So it's obviously positive. There's still a lot of work to do, and it's a great group of people that work at the detachment here. But yeah, in all, I'm really, really pleased with what I've seen in the last year.
Now, this really is very, very good news. So I just have to ask, are you carrying on policies that were put in place before you came here? You've been here a year. Or is this truly the Eric Rochette plan? Is this all as a result of what you're doing?
Well, I like to say it's all my plan, all my work, but I have to give kudos to the previous detachment commander, or Superintendent Brian Hunter now. He established he created a crime reduction unit team within the local detachment here. And obviously we didn't see the impact right away, but now the unit's been in place for a few years. We've seen the impact. Was what the crime reduction unit is able to do is to focus on prolific offenders, which is not always a possibility for frontline general duty members that are more reactive than proactive, just because they have to attend calls for service. The crime reduction unit is able to work with probation, work with the parole office, and work on keeping an eye on those prolific offenders, make sure if they get released on bail, they actually comply with those conditions. And a lot of time, if you put a lot of pressure on prolific offenders, they're gonna change their behavior or they're gonna move on to a different community. And um, obviously, the impact that they've done the last couple of years, that's why we've seen that trend. And obviously, it's been really, really positive the last year. But if you look back, statistically speaking, in 2018, 2017, you could see there was some ups and downs for sure. But then once they established that program, it's really well established with great communications with Crown Council as well and the Mental Health Association. We can work on all those clients. It's not always about making arrests. It's about trying to support them as well to maybe can help change the behavior and having more a positive impact on the community. And so that's one aspect that I think has have a positive impact on detachment, as well as we have this program that was established a couple of years ago that's really going to expand this year is the Indigenous Social Navigation Program, which is focused on social and justice issues for Indigenous people that live within the city of Port Alberni, which is the number fluctuates between 3,000 to 4,000 people. It's about 20% of the population. And we try to have a more wraparound approach, meeting client needs. Basically, we're looking at if someone's identified as being an issue with police, the calls for service, and a lot of time with the calls for service, it's not always related to criminality, sometimes homelessness or addiction issues, housing issues. You know, sometimes people call us, they've seen that individual sleeping on a bench, and is it really a policing issue? Not really, but we do attend and we do get calls, so we're trying to find solution to that, and that's a positive aspect of that program is they look at housing health. And when I talk about health, and we talk about physical and psychological health as well, mental health, and housing and family issues. And so it's just that wraparound approach. It started in 2018. And we've seen really the impact of last year because that type of program is always kind of slow going to see the impact. Like slowly, you know, you've been dealing with this client that in the past we've had 20 or 30 calls for service. And now because we're helping that person with housing and they feel better about themselves and things are kind of getting set into a positive place, then we see a reduction in calls for service, which usually linked to reduction for maybe criminal behavior. And so like what I mentioned about the expansion of the program is we've just been approved for funding for I want to say a full-time social worker with a program. It's going to be a 27-hour a week. We applied for it through the forfeiture program to the province, and we're just currently in the process of looking at resumes and hiring a social worker that will work with the RCMP members. And that program is led by the Indigenous Policing Service from the local detachment. So there's 4 members on that team, but it's specifically one officer that's been quite engaged in that program. And so we're excited about that, and hopefully it's going to keep that positive trend and it's going to help us, you know, going with the crime trend to keep going down and the positive for the detachment and the community as well.
This sounds amazingly positive, Eric. This sounds like such a solid path forward from where we are in North America right now. And I can't imagine how difficult it has been for you and your officers during the past few years. How many hats you've had to wear as a police officer when you go out to calls and you don't know if they're going to require a social worker or a mental health worker or a police person.
Yeah, and that's one thing, like people ask me, because obviously I've been doing it for 24 years, and what's the difference? And as a police officer, you always, you know, the social worker kind of aspect of it's always been in place. But I've noticed in the last few years for sure that there's a lot of pressure on police officer to, yeah, like you mentioned, wear multiple hats. So you're expected to be a social worker, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a nurse, and a parent sometimes even. And it's difficult to be good at everything. And when you try to be great at everything, usually you just kind of end up not being that great at anything, basically. So we want to make sure that if it's a health issue, we want to work with the stakeholders that can actually help us. Like obviously mental health is a big aspect. And when we look at addiction, so if we want to try to find solution in regards to that is we really try to make sure that police officers focus on dealing with crimes. So that's our expertise, and that's where we want to focus on. If we deal with a client who's really suffering from mental health, well, let's try to find someone that can help us, or a group, or a committee that can maybe tackle that person and deal with those issues. Obviously, officers have a certain amount of training, and we deal with the public on a daily basis, and usually, a crisis situation. So there's some expertise there, but we're no expert, and that's the reality of what we do. We just want to make sure that people are safe and we can kind of resolve whatever is happening at the time we call. But we want to make sure in the long run, what can we do? And that's what we start seeing, like I mentioned earlier, the social navigation program. It's kind of one aspect of what I expect in the future for policing. I know locally we're involved in different groups. We're involved in the community action team, which in relation to addiction and the opioid crisis, which is obviously everybody's well aware of what's been occurring in the last couple of years. And again, it's something that really we're not going to arrest our way out of issues like that. Like we need to, yeah, if there's, we try to go after the traffickers, people that are making profits from other people's addiction issues, but then we need assistance in regards to that, right? So we can deal with a trafficker, but what about the youth that are addicted, which is, as far as I'm concerned, a health issue, and that's where we're working closely with Vancouver Island Health Authority, and like I mentioned earlier, the community action team, which are members from the Canadian Mental Health Association, as well as the Safe Injection Site and overdose prevention, and all those different agencies that can help us. And so, we're trying to find solutions that within a wraparound kind of ways that not everything is on the RCMP or, the city police force. Obviously, there's a reality is there's an incident at 3 a.m. You can't really call a social worker. So there's an expectation that the RCMP will be obviously answering the call. But what I'm starting to see, and it's something that we're going to start to explore probably in Port Alberni. Obviously, the size of the detachment says the community has an impact as far as the financial impact of that. But we've seen it like local in Vancouver Island, like Nanaimo detachment just started I think they call it a Car 56, which is basically a police officer with special training that works with a mental health nurse. And they have a list of clients that they can go visit. And if at the same time, if they keep repeating calls for service for a certain person, then they just take over and they can work on solutions, trying to make things a little bit better, a bit easier for that person. And for the detachment, it's a great investment. It's in fact that it reduced the calls for service. So those are all the things that we're looking at. Obviously, I have to keep in mind the reality of Port Alberni, our local priorities, the size of the detachment, and the services we can access. But we've seen it in Surrey, we've seen it in Kelowna, and now, like recently, it just started in Nanaimo a few weeks ago. And I know that it's been quite successful in this short time frame.
Wow. Strikes me that the general public sees about maybe this much of what you and your officers do. And really, you're doing an awful lot that we just can't see for a lot of different reasons. But because it's not always obvious, because we can't always see, there's often frustration. People get frustrated when they don't see enough being done, in their opinion, and that bubbles over sometimes. And that, again, has to make your job more difficult.
No, absolutely. And, it's always challenged. That's why, like I mentioned earlier, I'm really open to people have questions or ask about the process and what are your priorities. And that's why I really enjoy being invited, like your show, is I can explain what we've been doing and showing, obviously there's a lot of challenges, but there's a lot of positive work being done. And we're trying to advertise that and not trying to get bogged down in some of the negative comments you can see on social media or on TV or you may read somewhere. Like you try to show like those are the challenges. I've always been upfront about some of our challenges and the challenges that we face on a daily basis. But there's some positive stories there, and I really try to share those as much as possible. But yeah, it is concerns, and you want to make sure that that's something I share with the members of the detachment, all the officers and the support staff. Like Obviously, out of the one negative stories, there's probably 10 positive stories that may not be in the forefront, but you have to keep that in mind. I know it's easy to kind of get just focus on the negative, but I just try to reinforce that we do a lot of great work. People do appreciate what we do, and there's a silent majority that everywhere I go, they thank you for what you do, and we want to support you if anything we can do. Like I get that all the time, and everywhere I've worked, and especially in Port Alberni, like I said, I've only been here for a year, and I've got just positive relationship with people and positive comments.
Well, building on that, building on positive things, one thing that is happening is the building that the city has purchased on 3rd Avenue, which is going to be turned into an office for community policing and bylaw. Tell me a little bit about what that's going to mean.
So obviously it's led by the city of Port Alberni, which I should comment that the support from the city has been absolutely amazing. Since I've been here anyway, and that building is a perfect example. So it will be city bylaw will be there, as well as the community policing manager, Dave Cousin, will be that's going to be his office. All the community policing volunteers will work out of there. Uh, there will be some spaces for officers to work from the office from that building as well. So it won't be permanent for them, but once the building is open, I'll really reinforce to the officers that when you work downtown or on 3rd Avenue or Argyle to stop by, and we're gonna have space there if you want to conduct interviews or do foot patrol. It's going to be great to have that presence, and so hopefully the building should be ready fairly soon. I think there's an expectation it'll be done probably in the fall, and I'm really pleased with the support I've received from the city, from City Council, and the CO as well has been the forefront of making sure this goes. And we're part of even the design of the building, we've been part of that as far as what we would like to see inside. And it's always great because you talked earlier about some negative aspect or positive aspect. Well, this is extremely positive. I always reinforce that when I meet any social clubs is there's no call too small. Basically, like any petty crimes you need to call the police. I know sometimes I'm talking to the public. I left my vehicle unlocked. It's obvious someone's gone through my vehicle, took some of the change that was left, and I don't want to. I don't want to call the police. You guys, you're too busy, and my messaging is always no. You need to call us because sometimes one person called us, but there was 10 other crimes committed in the same night. So it's important for us to be aware of that so we can actually focus our attention. And I'm a strong believer in with the use of a crime analyst, where you can focus on area of issues, and then we can refocus our attention. I talked earlier about the crime reduction unit. Well, that's one aspect. Suddenly we're getting all those reports of, let's say, theft from vehicles. Well, then I can ask my crime reduction unit, and our frontline members, okay, we've been issues in this location, let's focus on that. But if people don't call, then we don't really know. The other part of it too is I always try to encourage people, if they want to be part of it, like assist in any ways, if they have time, is we're always looking for volunteers. So community policing volunteers, you can give us an hour a month or 40 hours a month. That's great. And you have any question regards that program, please call the detachment. Our community policing manager, Dave Cousin, will be more than happy to answer any of your questions. It's a really great group of people. They're involved in citizen on patrols, speed watch. I'm sure you've seen them on the streets. They're going to do Bike 529, which is identifying your bicycles, and then if it gets stolen, it's all entered in a data bank, and it helps the police to recover stolen bicycles. So as a community member, if you feel like I'd like to get involved, that's a great way as well to get involved. And you're retired or you're students or you have weekends available, please feel free to join. It's a great group of people, and we're always looking for more help, more eyes in the community.
And it's a great way if you're one of those people that is grumbling about the policing in Port Alberni, if you're sitting at home complaining about it, it's a wonderful way to take positive action, be part of the solution, and be an extra set of eyes.
it'd be great if you had like 30, 40. Right now, I think we have 27 volunteers. If we could go up to 40, 45, like I can't say enough of like citizen patrols. They go out in the evenings and they just drive around, observe and report. You see anything suspicious, you call the police and they just walk away and we'll take over. We just can't be everywhere. And one of the issues for Alberni, it's a pretty busy area as far as calls for service. And we unfortunately do a lot of reactive policing. I would love to do more proactive, but we're not quite there yet. So if you look at statistically speaking, an officer, a frontline general duty officer, has about 5 minutes an hour of proactive time. And that's over a 24-hour period. So obviously they have more free time probably at 3, 4 in the morning than during the peak hours of noon to midnight. So having the citizen on patrols and or speed watch for helping with traffic enforcement, and that is, great for us and really helpful. And I know the members are really grateful for the work they do.
Well, I am one of those people that does truly appreciate what you do, so thank you and your officers for everything you do to keep us safe in this community. And thank you for being my guest today on Upfront.
Oh, thank you. It was my pleasure.
And thank you at home for joining us on this edition of Upfront. We'll see you next time.